Welcome to a Truth by Billie Beene flash update. Thanks for hitting the like button. That helps my channel to grow. Today's date, June 10, 2025. Time in Texas, about noon. Some of my sources I'll be using: God in the Bible, Patriot Subscribers, BP Earthwatch, Hal Turner, New York Post, David NINO, RODRIQUEZ, Plus. Some of the things we'll cover: commies versus America. Burn it down, they say. God, the American people, and President Trump say no. So let's get started. Apparently, this coming Saturday, June 14, when there will be a huge and wonderful parade and festival and celebration in Washington, D.C. of the birth dates of both the Army, 250 years, and also President Trump's 79th birthday. There'll be a lot of goings on. I'll go over that with you. But apparently on that day, the deep state communists who are paying protesters up to $12,500 a week to protest, along with a CCP billionaire who's also funding many communist groups inside Texas and other states. They plan to have, on Saturday, massive protest. And I've put forth some of the cities we know have been identified: Washington State, Seattle, Portland, California, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Denver, Colorado, Phoenix, Arizona, Dallas, Texas, Austin, Texas, where in Texas and Dallas and Austin we had protests began last night. Chicago, New Orleans, Miami, St. Louis, Atlanta, Milwaukee, New York City, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. Yeah, baby, you need to keep your powder dry for sure. So that's going on. And now we have this from the Steve Quayle's aggregate site, New York Post. Communist paid protesters by the deep state have plenty of money. They were filmed in Los Angeles by Fox News, handing out military grade and law enforcement grade tactical gear to the rioters, including riot shields and gas masks. And this was videoed by Fox News. The brand name seen inside the vehicle where they were being passed out on the shields is Bionic Shield. So that's going on. And oh yes, Hal Turner had brought out when the deep state communist fires broke out. I believe that was in Palisades near Los Angeles. And Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, a real Karen to her core. Hal Turner's intel had brought out that for decades she had made annual visits to Cuba, and she had a very close relationship with Fidel Castro. So Mayor Karen Bass is for real, represents a real communist. So that's going on. And we have this. Also, the New York Post has put this out Sunday. A Muslim leader in the Middle East of Al-Qaeda named al-Awlaki put out a 34-minute video calling for all Muslim believers in the U.S. to unite and rise up and assassinate President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and their families. And David Nino Rodriguez had also, with 107, had intel about the Muslim Brotherhood also uniting with the deep state communist. So that's going on. And this Al-Qaeda leader, al-Awlaki, his location I noticed wasn't mentioned, it's just said from the Middle East. That could be because the U.S. State Department has already labeled him a terrorist and has a $6 million bounty on him. But nevertheless, he put the video out calling for Muslim believers to rise up and begin assassinations. Now, in a previous video I had put out in Houston, Texas, when I was going to college in the 90s, I had a summer philosophy course, and my assignment was to go to 3 different religious meetings, different from my religion. One of them was a mosque, a Muslim meeting. A local Houston millionaire, that was his mosque. He was from Africa, I believe, but he was Muslim. And I reported that, of course, they separate the men and women. And then the women had to wear scarves. And when the Muslim male leader began to speak, the women inside the separate room had to get on the floor and put their face on the floor, bow down, just to the voice of this Muslim male preacher. But the things he heard placed me almost in an altered state of consciousness. I had never heard anyone advocating the overthrow of the government of the United States of America. But what he said was, we Muslims here in America, we come here with the long-term purpose to overthrow the government of the United States of America. We do become naturalized citizens. We raise children and we indoctrinate them to become politicians and take over the government so that we can take America down from inside. Now, Mike from around the world, regularly on Pastor Paul Begley's Thursday night program, we believe Mike works for the government, he knows stuff, says that there are traitors inside America who have become naturalized citizens and have been here for decades, but who despise America and want to bring it down from within. I have first-hand knowledge, and I believe this would definitely include Muslims. So that's going on. And now we have this. If you've ever seen the movie Eagle Eyes plus other high-tech sci-fi movies, then it's easy for you to understand the technology, indeed, of Big Brother being operative. And certainly we have satellites, according to Dr. William Mount, who could read from satellites in the sky in the 70s, could read a license plate number. So my thinking, and I give God the credit, there's no way we know these communist and CCP rioters are moving location to location in buses. There's no way that the federal government and large state governments cannot track their movements. So what's going on? Why is the federal government and large state governments allowing these protests? Another flip perspective of what's going on in America, to me, appears to be that these protests are being allowed for a short time so that President Trump can disperse the U.S. military across America, and I believe it's very likely President Trump will sign the Insurrection Act. So, I'm just saying. And now we have this from Hal Turner this morning at 4 a.m. We had 12 plus buses departing a U.S. military base, 29 Palms, taking 700 Marines from the 2nd Battalion, 7th and 1st Divisions to Los Angeles to join up with Task Force 51 in support of the U.S. federal government against the communists. And now, from New York Prepper, we had, yes, so Sunday, President Trump does not like to go to Camp David, located close to Washington, D.C. However, Sunday night, he went there and met with his U.S. military Secretary of Defense and generals from 6 to 8 p.m. on Sunday night. And then Monday, we began to see Marines, a plan being put forth to deploy Marines to Los Angeles. And we know from multiple sources, President Trump does consider putting in place the Insurrection Act. Now, as I brought out in a recent video, certain parts of putting the Insurrection Act in place, which allows the U.S. military to be exempted from the Posse Comitatus law. Several things the president has to do before he signs the Insurrection Act is he has to give a verbal public statement for the protesters, rioters, looters, arsonists to disperse, and he has to make a public statement about the possibility of bringing on board the Insurrection Act. Now we have this, and I think every American should know we are fighting communists funded by the deep state and also the CCP. We have this week the third CCP scientist bringing in additional bioweapons. So this happened in Detroit. Shang Zhang Han brought in biological material. In this case, I believe it was a weapon form of roundworm. Now, anytime you take an organism or a virus into a lab and juice it up, it becomes a bioweapon. And she didn't have the packages with her, but apparently the FBI had been tracking her. She tried to get in a few weeks before she was arrested at the Detroit airport, and her visa was denied. Somehow or another, she got on another plane and made it to the Detroit airport, where she was arrested by the FBI. Now, President Trump, we know, is strongly coming out against Harvard, putting forth that Harvard appears to be in collusion with the CCP. And all three of these CCP scientists attempting to bring in biological material to the U.S. went through Detroit to and associated with the labs in the University of Michigan. And this individual, Shang Zhang Han, had received her PhD from Wuhan University. I put forth that President Trump, in addition to going after Harvard and other colleges and universities who appear to be colluding with the CCP to bring in CCP spies, that he add the University of Michigan to that list. So that's going on. And now we have this. So we have, Hal Turner brings this out from his intel. And I brought out that the JB Dem show, now we're fighting the deep state, and the commies, the CCP, and the Dem political party. Plus, we know we have many rhinos inside the Republican Party. Rhino, Republican in name only, who are bought off and are operating as spies and operatives for both the deep state and the CCP. So we're going into our 5th day of protest in California, with the protesters setting cars on fire, throwing bricks, causing harm to law enforcement plus. So that's going on. And I had multiple sources now, including through the eyes of a Polish journalist, that the protesters are being paid by the Soros group $12,500 per week to protest. And we had the Dem political party under JB put out in December of 2024 billions and billions and billions of dollars from the Energy Department to groups who had no business plan and no vetting and no tax number and so on. So it's believed the Dem political party is also helping to pay the George Soros MoveOn.org organization. Plus, it's coming out, there's a CCP billionaire also putting up billions of dollars to support these protests. And that money is coming from CCP. And we had last night, protests began in Dallas and Texas and Austin, Texas. In Dallas, the police were standing against the protesters. In Austin, the protesters were engaged in unlawful threats, and the local law enforcement in Austin, Texas were using pepper spray to disperse the crowd. And the protesters in both Dallas and Austin anti-ICE protest, which we know is not legal. Now, it's being put forth that these protests in Austin, Texas represent a chapter of a group called PSL. P as in Paul, S as in Sam, L as in Larry. PSL. And they are operating in multiple U.S. cities, and they are funded by a CCP billionaire, Neville Shinghan. So we see the deep state, the Dem political party, the CCP, all engaging in criminal acts. And we had Governor Abbott pre-positioning additional law enforcement assets in both Dallas and Austin. So those protests are not being allowed to escalate to the communist mayor Karen Bass in Los Angeles, as she's allowing the protesters to injure federal employees local California police. She's a communist. It's my opinion that she possibly, she certainly admired Fidel Castro, and it was documented by the FBI, of which Hal Turner used to work for 15 years. It was securely documented that Karen Bass, current mayor of Los Angeles, made annual trips to Cuba, and that she was very close to Fidel Castro. And this went on for decades and began when she was in college. So most likely Karen Bass has been a communist person and spy since she was in college. So that's going on, and I stand on a reliable source putting that information out. And now we have this. So President Trump has said if, and what the communists and CCP rioters are doing is they're spitting on law enforcement, federal, local. President Trump says if they spit, we will hit. And yes, and the illegals have been documenting spitting, putting their biologic, maybe that's their way of spreading some kind of biologic virus. Who knows? From Dabu77, talking about California as being set up also now with BLM 2.0. We know that President Trump has activated 2,000 federalized 2,000 National Guard for up to 60 days in California, and now he's sending in 700 Marines, active duty military, to Los Angeles. So that's going on. And oh yeah, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, a clear and shining example of a deep state controlled president, went on TV Sunday in Mexico encouraging illegals in the United States plus Mexican American citizens to unite and rise up against the U.S. government, calling for illegals and Mexican American citizens to overthrow the current government of the United States of America. And so I say to Claudia Sheinbaum, shut up. And now we have this. BP Earthwatch brought this out. Now I mentioned the movie Eagle Eye, and also brought out that it isn't possible that the federal government, the U.S. military, large state governments are not able to track the movement of buses of these protesters as they move city to city. And W77 also brought this out. He's been an independent journalist for a good many years, and he brought out that, I believe that was in Detroit years ago. He was covering a protest, and he could watch the protesters get off of buses, and they would be talking about how much money they were making and where they were going next. And so this has been documented and known by the federal government, the large state governments, and the U.S. military for decades. I submit that the communist and CCP deep state have been operating and orchestrating demonstrations inside the U.S. Here's another example of technology capable of narrowing down the location of a protester and arresting them. So BP Earthwatch brought this out. We had ICE vehicles and other law enforcement vehicles getting out of Dodge, and an individual on the outside of Los Angeles, or the outskirts, had a pile of bricks. And this is another thing that the Soros, MoveOn.org, and the CCP regularly do. They set up the protest, bus in the protesters, who they're paying up to $12,500 per week. And they bus in also bricks for them to throw. And so this individual, Ilipio Reyna, was on the outskirts of Los Angeles chunking bricks at the ICE vehicles as they were getting out of Paramount, California. He had a helmet on, which does not facilitate facial recognition. However, he had a cell phone with him, which does facilitate geolocating. And so the federal law enforcement agencies were able to identify him. They've already raided his house, and they are currently looking for him and offering a reward of $50,000 for information leading to his arrest. So yeah, the government knows where these people are. And now we have this. So we have the Soros and the CCP are mapping out, they have a map where they plan to do riots June 14. Now, some of the cities I've already put out are on this map, and BP Earthwatch has a good map that's very, I've seen maps on other sites, but his is very clear for the protest locations planned by the deep state Soros and the CCP, planned for this coming Saturday, June 14. They want to take America down. And now we have, the commies versus America, I'm calling it, and versus President Trump. So there's a map for these riots that are being planned. And as I put forth also, we have a Al-Qaeda leader in the Middle East calling for the Muslims to rise up and assassinate President Trump. Plus, we have Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico encouraging illegals and Mexican Americans to unite and rise up against the federal government. Well, you might see the illegals doing that, Claudia, but Mexican American citizens I've known for decades love America. And now we have this. So all these protests, and it appears to be hundreds of them, planned for June 14, is to take away from a parade and celebration that will be held in Washington, D.C., June 14, celebrating the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army and the 79th birthday of President Trump. So they're going to have a full day of activity, including a parade. And in the parade, they will have thousands of U.S. military marching in costume. It ought to be a very interesting parade, reflecting major conflicts the U.S. has been in costumes of that era, including 1775, the U.S. Revolution, of course, the Civil War, and Vietnam, and World War I, World War II, plus the Middle East conflicts we've been in recently. So the parade is going to take place, I believe, about 6:30. It will be at 18-mile. So what Washington has put in place is 18 miles of fencing and 175 magnetometers. This is part of the security. And the parade, I believe, begins about 6:30 and will include, as I said, thousands of military, plus 100 military vehicles, Abrams tanks, Blackhawks, Apache, and Chinook helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles, plus. Then the U.S. Army will have demonstrations of parachutes, jumps by the Army's Golden Knights. After the parade, which I believe starts about 6 or 6:30, they will have a concert and fireworks. President Trump will speak. Now, earlier in the day, from about 9:30 to 12:30, there will be Army fitness competitions, awards given out. From 11 a.m. to about 5 p.m., there will be a military Army festival held at the National Mall. So yeah, I don't watch TV generally, but I think I'm going to have to tune in on Saturday. And now we have this. Judge Napolitano recently interviewed Larry Johnson, former CIA, talking about a law enforcement legal attorney, Ed Martin, working on behalf of President Trump, saying it looks like Ed Martin has been able to trace money. And when I was talking about the money from Soros and the CCP billionaire going to the protesters, that's also being tracked, we understand, by the DOJ. But this Ed Martin, attorney in a special situation for President Trump, has been tracking money received by Republicans and Dems, kickbacks from Ukraine, and it looks like one received $17 million and one received $23 million. Could this be Lindsay and Blumenthal, who we saw June 1 or thereabouts, operating as traitors against the United States of America? So that's going on. We have this from New York Prepper. Last night riots were spreading to a new area in California, Santa Ana. And the protesters were using fireworks and hitting the Los Angeles police with them. So that's going on. And we have this. David Nino Rodriguez recently interviewed Mark Anthony in 107, talking about rumors. And David puts forth, yes, we need to be in prayer for San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. Yes, I believe for the whole nation. And that there are, and has been identified by the U.S. federal government and large state governments, that we know the Soros, MoveOn.org. I brought out that CCP organization, PSL. So the federal government and the large state governments have on record up to 190 different organizations who were engaged in this deep state communist CCP protest. And states that ICE has been arresting criminal illegals, including Trenda Aragua, MS-13 plus. And these protests are just a demonstration of the deep state communist embedment. Also, as I brought out, also a Muslim embedment, and definitely CCP. And the protests, yeah, the protesters who are being arrested are also being tied back to the Mexican and South America cartels. So we see Claudia Scheinbaum and David Nino Rodriguez brought this out. Yeah, rumors about the Muslim Brotherhood. And as I said, we had that Al-Qaeda leader in the Middle East going on Sunday. Assassinate Muslims. Rise up. Unite. Assassinate President Trump. Vice President Vance. Plus. So that's going on. And we have this. We have from the White House, yeah, President Trump had just signed an executive order. It went in, today is Tuesday. I believe it went into effect over the weekend. Travel restrictions, don't let people into the U.S. from certain nations. It was up to 30 nations, including some Middle Eastern and Africa and Haiti and so on. So that's been put in place. And also arresting illegals who have overstayed their visas. And I submit to you, when the U.S. federal government representative tries to say, oh, we can't keep up with visas, we don't know who's overstayed their visa. What we, the American people, should be saying is, shut up. We, the American people, are awake. I mean, you just arrested this Reyna guy based on geolocating of his phone for, you know, foreigners coming in this nation with visas. They would have phone numbers. Plus, the FBI, CIA is able even to track burner phones. Don't let them kid you. We are under surveillance. So yeah, they know where people are who have overstayed their visas. So they need to be arrested. President Trump wants them out. And we, the American people, we want them out also. So that's going on. Oh yeah, you can't come here on President Trump's list of nations. You can't come here includes Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, plus. And now we have this from Stephen Gardner, who interviewed a ex-Secret Service individual, Charles Marino, who said that the JB show destroyed evidence regarding the assassination attempt on President Trump in Butler, PA. And you know, President Trump had, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of rallies, and the only one CNN came to video in person was the rally in Butler, PA. Is it believable? Can we suggest that the CNN fake deep state news channel organization had previous knowledge about an attempted assassination on President Trump? Well, you be the judge. And this is coming out. Oh, yeah. And the traitors, Lindsey Graham and Dick Blumenthal and Mike Pompeo, right about June 1, when Ukraine did that attack on Russia's 1/3 of their nuclear triad, their planes, that these senators spent over $500,000 just on hotel and meals. It must be a really good life to be a senator and on the take with American taxpayer money. Now we have this from a Facebook friend. Japan sprays protesters with indelible blue dye, which assists them later in IDing the protesters. How about it, America? And we have another Facebook friend. I believe God is giving the biggest altar call in history. I believe that a lot of Americans are going to be crying out to God. I believe we're not going to have civil war, but we do have bad players inside the U.S. who want to destroy us. So yeah, keep your powder dry, baby. I have another Facebook friend. I believe people with siblings, brothers and sisters, have better survival skills. They gain experience through their childhood of physical combat, psychological warfare, and sensing suspicious activity. Yeah, that's been my experience too. So it's good to be in prayer for America, President Trump, the U.S. military, and world peace. I love you, and I'll see you soon.